unmute yourself, please. Oleg, just a moment. Oleg, you need to unmute yourself. Can you click on the microphone?
Yes. Did I mute? Do you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you very well. Everything is fine.
The most difficult is behind us because I am very nervous technically because you never know, but we are almost on time. So my request to you is to moderate because I've seen questions, but please, can you just do it part by part? Like we have 5-6 blocks there. Can you read number 1, then I'll answer, and then we'll go on, okay?
Sorry, Oleg?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you hear me?
Yes, I hear you.
You heard me, that you will be moderating. Like,
yes.
I make very brief introduction, then you say block number 1. You remember there are questions, and then there are like 5-6 blocks, okay?
Okay.
And then you can also, I'm not sure I will be seeing questions here, so
okay.
Probably you can read some. Fine?
Yes, if questions appear, I will read your question, and you will discuss, and you will answer these questions. Yeah, fine.
And we have hour plus. I don't know how much time do you expect it to last?
1 hour, 1.5 hours. One hour.
Okay.
As much time as you need, I guess.
Well, no problem. I have time. I'm right now in my office. So I wanted to say that actually, I remember how I promised you this lecture. We talked long time ago when there was no war in Ukraine. And I talked to my colleagues, and I like to do these things from time to time. I was doing English lectures with Ukrainian students with different audiences since 2000 something. So the language is English. I am very relaxed with this. I remember there was a good friend of mine who was Minister of Foreign Affairs of Czechia, Schwarzenberg, and he was Minister of Foreign Affairs, but his English was awful. I worked like 5 years in India, so I can understand anyone who thinks he's or she's speaking English. But I like very much his phrase, he once said that bad English is our common future language, because we are not bearers of this language, but I will not try to be very complicated in what I'm going to speak about. So welcome. Let's start. Can you just announce first question?
Oh, not questions. Yes, guys, if you have questions, you're welcome.
No, not questions. I mean, you remember we discussed there would be blocks of issues, what we are going to discuss, because, or I can start it myself.
Yes, you can start yourself. I guess it will be much better.
I can start from very general, because the title of this lecture is about Ukraine, West, real assistance. Is it real or is it fake? And I would say that it is absolutely clear it is not fake. We do have this assistance. Our military feel it. Our government feels it. Maybe not all of experts who are mostly spending their lives in networks can know it and feel it, but there is lots of assistance coming. Lots, but not enough. Our president is talking about this. Our Minister of Foreign Affairs, who yesterday was in Brussels, he says he has just 3 questions, only 3. Weapons, weapons, and weapons. This is mostly what Ukraine needs now, and this is mostly what the West is doing. But the West here, despite all its unanimity, the West is really united, unprecedentedly united, but still, if I would be answering that question, I would judge on is it effective or not, depending on what strategy do we see or do we have? It's clear that Ukrainian strategy, Ukrainian presidents, Ukrainian people, Ukrainian soldiers is as simple as that. Russians, get out of our land, leave us alone, and stop bombarding immediately. After you leave the territory, as it was before you occupied, you attacked us on February 24, we can discuss Crimea, we can discuss parts of occupied territories. This is like our basic position. Russian position is very different. Actually, Russia is still insisting on Ukraine agreeing on Russian terms, and they use words of denazification. They would like to disarm us. They would like us to recognize that Crimea is part of Russia. They would like to recognize independence of separatist parts of Donetsk and Lugansk. And as we talk, nothing much changed. The negotiations themselves are more fake than Western aid, because I was carefully watching yesterday's the conference which Peskov, Russian spokesperson, was giving to British Sky News. It was, well, it was, I don't know how to describe it. When you see the person who speaks pretty good English, and when you see British journalists asking him very straightforward questions, mostly saying that, guys, you are lying about everything. And the guys in his answers continued to lie, just non-stop lies. And I was specifically impressed when the correspondent says, listen, there are a number of lies you did, which the world has exposed, starting from Crimea. You occupied Crimea, but at the beginning you've been saying we are not there. Then later on, your president admitted that your green polite men were actually your special forces. Then shooting down Malaysian airplane, and number of questions like that, which are obvious. And still Peskov was said, no, it's not Bucha, obviously. Bucha, they talked a lot about Bucha, where Peskov tried to say that it's never us, it could be fabricated. You can attach the dates to satellite. So in Peskov's world, there was a huge conspiracy where satellite and Western journalists and CNN correspondents who made all these horrifying reports from Bucha, they are all in conspiracy to accuse Mother Russia, which never and ever did such atrocities. Russian soldiers never kill civilians. Russian missiles never target civilians. It's Ukrainians who use civilians as a human shield. And all that shit he's saying, and you can see how British correspondent tried to keep some politeness, but it's very difficult. In short, when we have Russia with such approach, it's practically impossible to agree, because we can have ceasefire when both sides agree that there is a compromise. For Russians to do so, they need us practically to surrender. They need us to, I repeat, recognize independence of Crimea as the Russian part, recognize occupied territories of Donetsk and Lugansk, and I think that they would like, that's why they are fighting for Mariupol, they would like to cut us off from Black Sea completely and connect Crimea with part of southern Ukraine territory. So these kind of positions are not compatible. Therefore, when we analyze the is it enough or is it not enough what West is doing, we come to second question or to second challenge. And what does West see as a possible compromise or as a possible solution? Does West have a strategy or it doesn't? And here it's more complicated because when we say the West, it's a broad entity. And by the way, yesterday when Peskov was confronted with BBC correspondent saying that the whole world is catching you lying. The whole world recognizes that you are an aggressor. Peskov's answer was, well, Europe, UK, or United States is not the whole world. He was clearly hinting at China, even at the country where I spent 5 years of my life, India, where Lavrov recently paid a visit, a number of African countries, Latin American countries. So we have to remember this when we say that we have one informational war, that, for example, in Turkey, which is member of NATO, 53% of Turks believe that the war in Ukraine is because United States started this war, not Russia. And this is NATO member country. Only 30-something% of Turks people believe that Russia is the reason of war in Ukraine. So in that part of the world to which Peskov is referring to, Russian propaganda in China, they are very effective. Actually convinced that the war is between US, which is using Ukraine as a puppet, and Russia, because US would like to defeat Russia. And much stronger propaganda is in Russia. I've been reading American analytical papers. I've been seeing how American journalists are talking to Russians. I've seen it on video. So lots of, a majority of Russians believe that, I almost quote, that if US would not be supplying arms to Ukrainians, we will not be losing our lives there. So the guy who answered this question say we should nuke, we should have nuclear attack on US and stop that because they are interfering in other countries' business. I quote the guy. And majority of Russians believe that it's the West at large, not only it's NATO, obviously NATO is such a big monster, and US, they try to destroy Mother Russia. They try, because they are envious, they are hostile. It's very fascist rhetorics. Hitler was always convincing Germans that Germany is surrounded by enemies. And then when you are a charismatic fascist leader, you use this trick quite often. Same trick was done by Mussolini, by other fascist leaders, where you convince your people that you are surrounded by enemies and you have to fight the whole world because they would like you to be dead. So Putin is rather successful in this propaganda warfare, and he reached that level of public support, which we see today. But I was very surprised by one of American correspondents talking to one of Trump's supporters, former American president, who still hopes to be reelected again. And the correspondent asked that was a woman, a middle-aged woman. He asked her, if you have a choice to vote for Biden or Putin as the president of the United States, whom you will vote for? And she said very clearly, of course, Putin. He is a strong guy. He is a real leader. We need this kind of leaders. And this is America in 21st century. Obviously, such people are not in majority, but Russian propaganda or this kind of propaganda works here. Trump has a number of times expressed his admiration for decisive leadership character of Putin's. He believes that Putin's attack on Ukraine is an act of genius, and he was saying that publicly. So we don't have a clear-cut strategy from the West here. We have some countries, specifically those countries who do remember what does it mean to be part of a Russian camp, like Baltic countries, Central European countries. They realize how dangerous Putin's war is, and they demand to stop it and to put Putin to justice. But there are other countries. There is Germany, there is France, There is newly elected Orban in Hungary. There are lots of politicians in Italy and Spain and many other old European countries who believe that you have to deal with Russia. It's a part of Europe, and you cannot corner it, you cannot destroy it. You have to reach certain settlement with that Russia. And therefore, when it comes to providing weapons, it's always the same discussions. The part of Europe, of NATO members, believe that Ukraine now, when Ukraine have succeeded in defeating Russians in first phase of their warfare, where Russians failed to catch Kiev and to conquer the whole country, but Russia has regrouped, and now the major battle would be in Donbass, part of Donbass, because they would like to conquer the east, and obviously they would like also to progress and to solidify their presence in southern Ukraine. Those countries are hesitating whether Ukraine should get, I mean, old European countries, let's say, or Putin first countries. They believe that Ukraine should not be given modern weapons with long-range missiles, with long-range anti-air, anti-ship, or anti-naval, or sophisticated armored vehicles, aircraft, etc., which would allow Ukraine to defeat Russia completely. Because if Russia is defeated completely with conventional warfare, then Russia may use nukes, tactical nukes, or even intercontinental nukes. And this is something where I strongly disagree. On vice versa, I believe if Putin will suffer serious defeat militarily, then he can back off. He will never back off as the result of sanctions or diplomatic pressure. No, only devastating military defeat can change the situation for better. If he will succeed, if he will see that West is hesitating, NATO is united, that Ukraine not united, that Ukraine is not getting modern, sophisticated, offensive weapons, which will allow Ukrainian forces to hit Russians by hundreds and hundreds of kilometers with long-range missiles, then Putin would believe that West is weak enough and he can destroy the whole Ukraine, and then he will go further. I have absolutely no doubt he will go further, because his hawks are already talking about punishing Poland, punishing Balts. Even Finland is mentioned as the target of possible Russian aggression. So the difference here in strategies result into the position where on those issues, West is not united, unfortunately.
Okay, Oleg, there are some questions in our chat. Can I read you some? Have you got time to discuss? To answer?
Sure. Welcome.
Okay. So the first question is, which sanctions can stop Russia?
In short term, if we are talking about weeks, there are no such. In medium term, the most painful for Russia is energy embargo, meaning coal, oil, and gas. European countries, as you know, they agreed that there would be embargo on coal. We are talking about amount of 8 billion euros per year. This is the number of revenues Russia is getting from supplying coal to Europe. But again, German position was to delay it, so it will be in September. In June or July, so the end of summer, not with immediate effect. And again, coal mostly are private companies. The most painful for Russia is oil, and even more painful, gas. But you know, here we have the problem. And number one country who is resisting this is Germany. Germany practically nourished or created today's monster as Russia is by its Ostpolitik. I spent hours and hours talking with German ambassadors who were my close friends, trying to convince them, to ask them why they stopped any progress for Ukraine's integration into European Union or into NATO. That was like 15 years ago, but position didn't change even today. I was meeting a few times Angela Merkel, and we discussed that also. The German position was that by signing multi-billion dollars with a multi-billion contract with Russia, we kind of embrace Russia. And when we have multi-billion dollars bilateral trade with Russia, that is guarantee that Russia would not go mad. And we see the result. That's why probably Merkel decided not to come to see Bucha, but traveled somewhere to South Italy for vacations, because, well, she knows what she will see. But still she says that she was right when she didn't, when she and that time French, Sarkozy, French president, blocked potential NATO integration in Bucharest in 2008 by not giving us membership action plan. So Russia can be stopped not by economic sanctions only. They have longer effect. If severity of those sanctions will continue for longer time, and this is the tactics of European Union, of Americans. Now they not only are announcing embargo on coal, but for example, they will not allow Russian ship to enter any European ports and American ports, Russian airplanes to fly over European or Canadian or American airspace. So they are isolating Russia from many sides: banking, national reserves, SWIFT. The demand should be that all Russian banks are disconnected, though Russia is working on bilateral payment system with China, but that is still very limited. So in short, there are a number of sanctions, and they do have effect. But if we are speaking about what can stop Russia now, I would repeat what our Minister of Foreign Affairs says: weapons, weapons, and weapons. And those are not only Soviet-made old-time weapons, but modern NATO. When some Western experts say that, oh, Ukrainians don't know how to use it, it's nonsense. We are learning very quick. And just before coming to you, I was watching news, and one of experts says that it takes sometimes 46 days to deliver. For example, President Biden is signing some agreement to supply like proper weapons, but from date of signature to date of delivery under present circumstances, it takes more than 1 month, 46 days. Therefore, I really welcome the fact that US has announced kind of Lend-Lease program, and they are voting on other legislation which allow Pentagon to ship weapons much quicker. But besides legal objectives, there are political, which I was talking about. That phrase which I hate when American president, I am referring to Polish MiG situation, you remember that, when Pentagon says that they couldn't do that because that might be seen by Russian president as a sign of escalation. I'm really, really hating it, because when Biden says that I don't care what Putin thinks, I wish the whole US establishment would be acting in this kind of thing. We don't care what Putin thinks, what he considers escalation. We are going to stand with you 100%, as Biden says. And I would like that to be real, not declarative.
Thank you so much, Oleg. Can you read you the second question?
Sure.
What is the possibility of nuclear war?
It is there. And what I welcome, the NATO and US acknowledging that it could be, because if military acknowledge something, It means they prepare response. Because to pretend that, Putin is not a suicidal idiot, he will not use that. We were hoping that he is not idiot, he will not invade Ukraine, but he did. And yesterday's interview of Peskov shows that they are all kind of Putin idiots. They believe that the whole world is deaf. They understand what is good, what is bad totally differently. So we cannot rely on their common sense, on their responsibility, on their humanity, because they believe that Russian soldiers never are killing civilians. So therefore, the West believes, but where I disagree with the West believes if they would give Ukraine heavy weapons, modern weapons, and Ukraine will defeat Russians and kick them out of our territory, then Putin might use nukes, because he would be desperate. He cannot afford to lose this war. In short, West believes if West and Ukraine will demonstrate that we are stronger, much stronger than Russia, then Putin, as the rat in the corner, would jump and bite us. And I believe in totally different strategy. I believe if Putin will see that West is hesitating, if he will see that West is not giving sufficient weapons, if he will see that West is afraid of Putin's using nukes, he is definitely will win. So it's about this. There is a risk of Putin trying to use nukes when he is completely defeated, but that risk is much higher than when Putin will see that he might win this war and that he can attack further and he can use nuke blackmail to force Europe and NATO for further compromission. He can attack like border parts of Poland, or he can attack Baltics and then say that those countries are not worth of nuclear war. Because if he sees that he is using nuclear blackmail and the West is moving back, he will continue. So here we disagree with the West. We must be strong. We must defeat Putin completely. And then the chances of nuclear war is much lesser than when we are weak, when Putin is allowed to destroy the whole country in the heart of Europe, and West will not dare to meet that challenge.
Okay, thank you so much, Oleg. Can I read the next question? Yeah. Why even after news from Bucha and Irpin, India continues to be neutral in question about war in Ukraine?
I told you I spent 5 years, I worked 5 years in that country, and I truly believe that this is the world's biggest democracy. It is very complicated, but more than 1 billion people, but they elect their leaders democratically. There are certain changes there. The answer why is because India, in many respects, is depending on Russian support. You can say that they are getting, since Soviet days, the Soviet Union, when I was working in India, it was the end of Soviet Union, 86, 91. And I saw how much of Indian military equipment was produced and repaired and serviced by Soviet Union, but mostly by Ukrainians, because we were there on many projects. We were subcontracted by Moscow that time. So that is long story. Then it comes to geopolitics. West and states are supporting Pakistan. And even Ukraine, when I was in National Bank, Ukraine signed that time huge contract for supplying Ukrainian-made tanks to Pakistan, which really pissed Indians off. They've been furious. And I remember those days very well. We didn't manage to complete that contract, but the fact is the fact. So Pakistan was supported by US as in their war against Soviets in Afghanistan. But Pakistan is like a strategic partner of the United States, and India is a bitter animal of Pakistan. They have still wars on Kashmir and Jammu there. It's the history. And therefore, it's another factor why Indian politicians believe that Soviet Union and then Russia was helping them to defend themselves against Pakistani threat. China is also historic animal of India. And here it's strange because Russia is a close ally of China, but still, I would say that this situation is changing nowadays because Indian Prime Minister and Japanese Prime Minister, Japan is taking very intensive position there. I was meeting here with Japanese diplomats and I was meeting with Japanese journalists, and I know that Japanese Prime Minister initiated press conference where he and his colleague Prime Minister of India has expressed common position on war in Ukraine. And recently, after Bucha massacre, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of India strongly condemned that. They said that this is unprecedented. So there are changes there. It was very smart appeal of our president to India, saying that he would like to see India as our strategic partner and guarantor of our security. But in general, we have to work hard to develop new kind of policies with countries like India. I was telling you that Russia was winning informational war there, using all their media and sending very different signals to people which live in Asia, in Africa, in Latin America. India is probably one of the countries where Russian propaganda was rather successfully reaching out and presenting war in Ukraine as war between United States, who would like to conquer Russia.
Thanks, Emiran. Oleg, next question. What do you think? Does the Germany's government conclude a secret contract with Russia?
It's clear that after massacres in Bucha, now when every day the headlines of major world TVs and newspapers and magazines are concentrated on horrific crimes against civilians. You can't hide that because this is 21st century. You cannot control all informational space. Russia internally is managing it, but in Germany, there is coalition government. There are different politicians. The public opinion is furious. So if you are German chancellor, or if you are a German politician, even if you are deeply Putin versteher, and if you believe that we have to deal with Russia, it is politically almost suicidal. But still, we can see that Chancellor Scholz is delaying the supply of 100 tanks. It's not modern, but I think it's the tanks from German democratic republics to be given to Ukraine. He is delaying that decision. Steinmeier, the president of Germany, publicly admitted that they made a mistake when they've been pursuing Putin versteher policies. But overall, the influence of multi-billion contracts of energy dependence, specifically energy dependence, we have in Germany politicians in power who were for decades pursuing that Ostpolitik, who were destroying nuclear energy, hydropower energy, and who were bringing Germany totally dependent on gas, which was cheaper than for other countries from Russia. And we have Nord Stream 1, we have Nord Stream 2. When the whole world was warning them, when EU was warning them, the German position, Chancellor Merkel, she could personally overrule any EU decision. And she was successfully defending, saying that, oh, there is no policy, it's pure economy. We are just business oriented. And now they are paying the price because in reality, Germany depends almost 50% on gas supplies, oil supplies from Russia, which violates even EU regulations that you cannot expose yourself to more than 30% from such a country. They are reversing now. Most probably they would review their strategy. But because those politicians who were involved into this dependency on Russia, they are now in power, they might be doing lots of things which you called secretly. But secrecy is difficult to achieve in modern days. There are oppositions, there are international intelligence. So it would be impossible to do things like Germany did after occupation with Crimea, where the head of Siemens met Putin and they reached secret agreement and they supplied reactors, Siemens-made reactors to Crimea. This story was now on front page of German newspapers. So secrecy is something which will not defend politicians, but my answer is that there are lots of them, there are big money involved, and we should not expect Germany to be very loyal or to be very close to what they have to declare. They politically declare right things, but in reality, their realpolitik is still so much dependent on Russia.
Thank you so much for such a full answer, Oleg. So the next question, I guess you have already answered it, but I will read it anyway from Andrew. I remember Russia's war in Afghanistan, which was stopped by sanctions. Is it real to repeat that now?
If we are talking about whose war, American war or Soviet war in Afghanistan, do you think she's talking about what war? Because Afghanistan was fighting many wars.
Can you tell or write us in chat, Andrew?
Is it about American or
Soviet?
Soviet.
Yeah.
Soviet is easier because the Soviets start losing war after Mujaheds got javelins, or not javelins, but anti-air launchers. The Soviets were dominant in air, as they mostly tried to be dominant in Ukraine. But when Americans started providing to Mujaheds this portable anti-air missiles, that completely changed the war scenario. So it was not so much about sanctions. It was about providing modern weapons which allowed Mujaheds, simply operated, which allowed Mujaheds to shoot down Ukrainian, to shoot down American or Soviet, excuse me, to shoot down Soviet aircraft, helicopters, Soviet tanks, and therefore Soviets had to be stopped. But also sanctions worked against Soviet Union. It was actually not so much sanctions, it was clever policy where Soviet Union started losing money on which it was earning on oil and gas, because Americans that time, they have broad alliance with oil producing countries and they successfully used this card, which is not happening nowadays. Now and it is important to notice that Biden announced the biggest since World War II opening of American oil reserves, and he had to do so because he failed to reach understanding with some of OPEC countries that they would exceed their quota. Russia is now winning on that side. There are very strong anti-American moods in United Arab Emirates, in other countries which are producing oil, and because Americans messed up in Afghanistan and practically they left billions and billions of investments. They trained and equipped 300,000 strong army, and that army was defeated by 20,000 strong Taliban. And there was a total disaster when Americans tried to build democracy there, and that's what they promised. They promised that they will build strong democratic country of Afghanistan. So they spent astronomical money, and as the result, all that collapsed. Billions worth of military equipment now is in the possession of Taliban in Afghanistan, and the rest of the world clearly saw that as a weakness. And though it was not actually done by Biden, the decision to retreat was taken by Trump. Before that, Trump reached agreement with Mujahid. But anyway, US has lost that role of the country which can be strong and which can defeat forces of evil or authoritarian. That therefore Putin, one of the reasons why Putin risked attacking us is actually situation with Afghanistan. And I'm repeating this quite often when I'm talking to American journalists.
Thanks a lot. The next question, Volodymyr Zelensky said that Ukraine of the future will look like a state like Israel. But what will the system of such a state be based on what economic basis? How to build an economy for such a serious militarization, houses with bombshells, and so on?
Oh, you know, as complicated as it sounds, my answer would be it's not so difficult at all. I was saying that we will be living like Israelis for a couple of years before war started, because I am quite often invited by Israel 24 TV channel. And when they ask how do I feel, I say, I feel exactly as if I am Israeli, because my country is surrounded by another country who would like us dead. You are surrounded by very hostile countries who would like Israel to be dead. So that's what Zelensky means, that we will be like Israel. We will be surrounded by very hostile nation, which shares thousands of kilometers with us. If you would add Belarus to that hostile nation, because they act now like a one, so it is a real threat. It is a real threat to have a neighbor who would like you not to exist, who doesn't give you the right to live peacefully or to have your own state. So here we are like Israelis. But Israel is so heavily dependent on US aid. And if you take per capita, the assistance of that assistance which Israel got is astronomical. You can't compare it to what Ukraine is getting. The most modern weapons, the biggest and the easiest financial aid ever. So I don't think that we might be having similar possibility that here we could be like Israel, but we can do different things. You remember Zelensky promised that he would change the country completely, that he would just wipe away that old bankrupt, outdated economy and build us very modern state. So Putin has practically destroyed that infrastructure. If you look at the map, you will see no other country in the world with such a territory, such richness in resources, not only agricultural, but overall. We have very high potential of gas, by the way, in Crimea and in Donetsk and Luhansk. People are not often talking about this, but I believe one of the reasons why we've been attacked, because when we found huge resources of gas in Black Sea near Crimea, and then when American companies moved in and found similar resources in Donetsk and Luhansk areas, it's not by coincidence that Russians moved in those areas. So, but when we liberate it, we'll be having that also. What we can do, I am now in the United States. I opened my banking account because I have to survive somehow. I got my fellowship at NED, National Endowment of Democracy, and I got some maybe like not stipendium, but if you are a fellow, you are getting monthly payment, right? And when I was opening the bank, they said to me, "Oh, you can move part of that money to wealth account." Wealth sound very seriously. I am banker. I spent many years in banking, in national banking, commercial banking, international banking. So I asked, oh, you are talking about interest rate? Yes, said the senior banker. And it will be 0.003%. So this is the interest you are getting on deposit in US. What does it mean? It means that money is cheap here. If you have money, if you put them on deposit, you will get 0.0 something. Ukraine has huge possibilities for investors. US is printing money in astronomical figures. I was central banker. I bypass Federal Reserve. I know that US is actually printing money. The biggest challenge in US now is inflation. They are challenging, I saw today's news, they are challenged with higher inflation. Why? Because if you have lots of money, they must be supported by something. Now imagine you have Ukraine, you have Ukrainian farmers who own thousands of hectares of land. What they need food processing lines. We have so much Ukrainian businesses, and we are not talking about IT. I met here one of the top 10 Ukrainian IT men. I am very inspired by the way Ukrainians are making business here. Of course, now they are all trying to help militarily, to help financially, create different funds, support kids, etc. But what they are saying that we don't need, we are not beggars. We don't need help. We don't need maybe grants. We can be business partners. American business simply doesn't know what to do with their money. They still produce or invest into Chinese or Asians factories. But I know personally lots of Ukrainian fashion makers who were already before war producing very high quality stuff and just sticking Saint Laurent or whatever on their production and selling them successfully in Paris, everywhere. I've been seeing how joint ventures where Ukrainian labor force is highly productive, highly disciplined, and it's much better, cheaper, and economically viable to organize this kind of businesses in Ukraine than to depend on China's policies or other countries' policies, because we can produce anything from shoes to modern fabric to spare parts to such car makers like Ford or others, because we are very good at this. In short, if we will create a situation where American investors can feel safe in our country, and if America will open up so Ukrainian farmer or Ukrainian businessman can come to US and can get some credit from US banks. As an ex-banker, I say that US should probably create certain political risk mechanisms to guarantee banks' risks. But they did it so in other countries. They did it very effectively. So if Ukrainian government on one hand and American government on the other hand will create proper environment for businesses, we could see multi-billion investments in Ukraine, which will give American investors much higher profits that they can get anywhere with very good quality. And we will see that it would be business money. It will not be a credit. This money could be repaid and country can prosper, because we have now to construct everything from the scratch. We have to raise our agriculture. We should not export raw materials anymore. We should process them. We should, and the world is facing hunger crisis. It is quite serious, but we can do that, but we shouldn't sell like raw grain and wood or raw materials. We should now build very modern processing facilities, fabrics, plants, and that can be done with just simple things. Ukrainian government creating conditions in Ukraine and American government making it possible for American investors to move in. And we are talking about huge money, which now have nowhere to be invested in US.
Thanks a lot. Sorry, Valeria, I have skipped your question, but I will read it to Oleg right now. So what people who speak Russian have to do? Is it okay if they keep speaking Russian after war?
I can say how I respond to people speaking Russian. I've met them in US, not too many of them, but I met them. It reminds me when I was a student and I watched one very strong movies with Leonid Bykov, who was playing the guy who was fighting Germans, fascists, in one small village with young recruited guys. There is love story as usual, but there were Nazis killing practically all of them. That all died. The Bykov was the last one to take grenade and throw himself under German tanks. And then I remember I was very impressed because there were music. Well, it was showing young people and they were all dying and they've been killed by Germans very cynically. And then I went out into the street and jumped into trolley. And there were two or three German cadets, Eastern Germany. Their uniform was still similar to German. And they've been speaking very loudly German language. And I couldn't help keeping my range because language does matter. When I hear now Russian language in US, my reaction is much stronger than I was hearing it before. And I can't blame those Ukrainians who don't understand what's the problem of learning the language. But I think that this is still very personal. I am absolutely convinced that knowledge of Ukrainian language should be a must for anybody who has ambition to move into government or into politics. Yeah, in your family, you can choose. But I clearly remember how I decided to switch completely to Ukrainian language, where my wife was from Donetsk. She speaks good English, but Russian was natural for her in day to day. But when we decided to speak Ukrainian, our logic was that our kids would learn Russian in the streets or somewhere, because there are lots of movies, etc. But if we don't teach them in family, they would not be knowing, they would be poor. So in short, my answer is that if you are Ukrainian citizens, no one in the world will guard your language. Only Ukrainians can speak Ukrainian and can defend Ukrainian, and Ukrainian can be a state language only in Ukraine. So now it's your choice. It's your choice, but I would strongly encourage to learn Ukrainian, to start speaking Ukrainian, to, if you have kids, to help them from the early years to learn that beautiful language. And Russian, I would say English should be second one. Russian could be among others.
Thanks a lot. Next question. What do you think? Will this war end?
Well, I'm pretty positive. I'm absolutely sure it will end. But we've been talking about this, how it will end. What will be the lesson learned? Because if it will allow Putin and his gang to get out of this situation without punishment, to escape punishment, then it means the war will end, but another would be a matter of time. We cannot simply preserve the world as it is without making a showcase that if somebody is a war criminal, and now majority of the world leaders are calling Putin war criminal. Interesting that in yesterday's interview, the journalist asked Peskov, what do they realize, does Putin realize that he will be brought to justice, that he is a war criminal? And Peskov's answer was, yeah, we hear this, but we don't believe this is realistic. So in short, what Peskov was saying, yes, we are criminals, but what you can do to us? You can realistically do nothing to us because we are big and we have nukes. So this is the challenge. If you would like that atrocities, that war, that scenario never repeated, we should review many things, from the structure of security, from United Nations Security Council, all other institutions which are there to guarantee peace, and they all messed up, they all failed. There is total failure. And Peskov was also saying that, oh, we do not recognize criminal act. And other countries are countries like Northern Korea or China, who do not recognize the jurisdiction of criminal act for war atrocities. So in this kind of world, the war will never end. So if you would like at least Europe to enjoy peaceful future, Putin and all those who are under War Criminals Act, whose atrocities are now documented because Ukraine invites all lawyers, all politicians from the whole world to come there and see. We are documenting this. There are thousands of witnesses documenting all those atrocities. That must end with a criminal verdict, and Putin and his generals and all Russian politicians who've been involved in this, they all have to pay the price. Only then we can say that the war is over and there is no threat of it repeating itself.
Thanks a lot, Oleg. Oleg, we have got a lot of questions from our audience. Would you like to follow your planned agenda, or I can read the next question to you?
No, we can have like another half an hour.
Yes, sure, we have.
Okay, let's go.
Questions, yeah?
I would be trying to answer. If there are many questions, I would be shorter.
There are a lot of questions, but we have time.
Okay, let's try.
Let's try. Okay, is it possible to influence on German government to change their mind by means of civil people? Yes.
Short answer is yes. Politicians are animals. They are very sensitive to public mood. I see lots of activists, including Ukrainian activists, organizing massive rallies against the war. I see German press biting German politicians. I know that there are opposition, there is political competition. So if there would be growing public pressure, German politicians would have no chance but to change their attitude and change their policy. We must keep them accountable. And Zelensky is very good at doing that when he talks to their parliaments, when he publicly addresses them and calls them to take sides, because you cannot be in between for a long time.
Guys, can you hear Oleg?
Yeah, I can hear you. Hello?
Yep.
Do you hear me?
Yes.
Do you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Alena has problems with internet.
No, I hear you. I hear you. Hello?
I think you can read the next question in the
Yeah.
chat.
Yeah, you
because
can.
Alena
Yes.
has. Mhm.
Yeah, I hear you. What is the next question?
The next one.
Okay. See.
Talking about, okay.
Can I read the next, because I have found the next question after Oleg have recently replied. So the next one is talking about energy sanctions. What an opinion for Europe exists to replace Russian oil coal? How fast this opinion could be implemented in reality?
Coal is realistic. I think that Russia will not get $8 billion for coal export as it got last year. There could be less than, maybe slightly more than half of it. So coal, as from the end of summer, there is embargo. Oil is also realistic, probably by the end of the year. On oil, there are a few countries hesitant, among them Germany, Hungary, obviously, Hungary is a special case for EU and NATO, because this is the country which politically doesn't agree on anything which EU and NATO takes in relations to Russia. So probably there is already a response from Brussels. Brussels is saying that they will not provide Hungary huge amounts of financial aid because they're acting strangely. But there would be other countries as well. So oil is clearly the Brussels is moving slow, but they are changing their policies. National governments are changing their policies. They would be looking for other alternate sources for energy. Like Britain, UK has announced that they would build 8 nuclear reactors. Germany most probably would come back again because Germany was very irresponsible. They had perfectly functioning nuclear energy sector, which was modern, safe, but they decided to get dependent on cheap Russian gas. Now they would reverse this policy. It will take some time. The most difficult is gas, because for the same Germany, they are so much dependent on Russian gas. EU is reversing their policy. They are looking for different gas supplies, but it will take time. But in medium term, Russia is completely losing the biggest market in the world, which is European, and they would not be able to come back. Even after the war, even if there would be new government, it would be a bad joke that Gazprom is a reliable supplier. The whole world saw that Russia is using energy supplies to blackmail the world. They're using it as a weapon, which we Ukrainians were telling for many, many years.
I'm sorry, can I ask one question about Hungary?
Yeah, sure.
Yes, what's your personal opinion about it? Because I cannot understand the Hungarian mentality and why is this country so silent? Yes, it means like they have no reaction at all. It seems like they have no reaction at all.
Well, I used to meet young Orban when I was director of the National Bank of Ukraine, because Orban was also a young prime minister. He was in the banking. He was like young, pro-European, very educated, charming person. That was end of 90s. Since then, he has changed completely. So he won elections using to maximum Russian propaganda. He has rather successfully blocked major opposition parties there. You know, in leaders like Orban or leaders like Putin or leaders like in Northern Korea or in China, they manipulate they play not on the light side, on better side of human being, but they play on darker side. So what actually what Orban is saying, that I care about my country. I don't care about the rest. I would like to see my country safe. I would like you Hungarians to feel safe. I would like you Hungarians to have cheap gas. I would like you Hungarians not to be afraid of Russian attack. Therefore, and I would like you Hungarians not to be dependent on bureaucracy in Brussels. So he is playing on that dark side of peoples rather successfully. And because that is long time and massive brainwashing campaign, it gives result. So he succeeded into using even the war in Ukraine, which is not shown as it is shown in Ukrainian media or even in Germany, which is shown with very different angle, because he uses strongly anti-Soros rhetorics. He uses anti-Zelensky. He said that he won despite Zelensky's position. You remember where he was saying that his victory could be seen from the moon. So convenient he is. He got what Hitler got. Hitler was having massive support of German voters when he was already launching a war. So from time to time, history repeats itself. The future of such leaders is not very bright. The people who are supporting these leaders would pay the price. And this is very big challenge for EU and for NATO. What do you do with a member country which denies basic policies when this country was applying for membership in EU and NATO? There are clear obligations which are ignored by Hungary. So this is a challenge for EU. This is the challenge for NATO, because we have another country who's a candidate, which is Serbia, which has which has strong demonstrators with Russian symbols, pro-Russian supporters, which has Russian president who called Putin and says, yeah, I am moving to EU, but I am your supporter, I am your fan. Serbia will always be with you. What do you do with such candidate countries? In short, it's time to say that there is a test, crash test for values in EU and in NATO. There should be lessons learned, because there might be more Orbans or more Serbs with their positions in the Europe. And then when we are dependent on their unanimous decision, it's a big problem. We can do whatever we are doing, but if Putin is having a couple of allies within EU and NATO which can block any decision, that is quite a challenge.
Thanks a lot. Sorry, guys. Zoom kicked me out for a couple of minutes. I'm terribly sorry, and all questions have disappeared. I will ask everybody to type questions again. We didn't, because all of them disappeared. It happens. I'm terribly sorry. So the next question for Oleg will be, NATO can directly help us, don't they? If they close the sky, it will mean the third world war. We can just hope to fight back our country.
Well, yeah, it's the biggest challenge for NATO now is that NATO was created after World War II to make sure that neither any European country can invade its neighbor again, that there could be no war, because the major result of World War II is that when somebody tries to revisit, to claim territorial claims against neighbors, that is absolutely impossible. We had that famous Helsinki Agreement about borders. We have many multinational agreements. We have so many declarations. And NATO was a kind of insurance company to make sure that all members who paid insurance fees, they are protected. And that was Cold War, when Soviet Union was clearly threatening the free world with another possible attacks and wars. More or less successfully, it was lasting till Russia attacked Georgia. NATO did nothing. Moreover, 2 months before Russia attacked Georgia, Bucharest summit in NATO, thanks to Merkel and Sarkozy, Germany and France's position, declined to give membership action plan for Ukraine and Georgia because we were technically qualified. So that led to war. And after that, Crimea, and now we have another war. In short, NATO failed to be guarantor of that peace in Europe. And NATO rhetorics now is not very comprehensive. I mean, NATO is saying that, yes, if there would be attack on our member, we will respond. But that is technical excuse, because if NATO will provide not nuclear weapons, but if NATO would provide any weapons Ukraine needs to defend itself, Russia has no excuses to use tactical nukes. And Russia clearly understands that in nuclear war, there will be no winners. There were already in the history previously, Soviets fighting with Americans, pilots in Korea, in Afghanistan, in Balkans. So there were many cases when conventional fight was between American pilots and Soviet pilots, and there was nothing like war happening. So I don't understand this logic of NATO saying that we should be aware that Putin might get nukes if there would be more assistance. I cannot understand how NATO can just be a passive witness of unprecedented massive destructions and killings of thousands of innocent civilians and kids in the heart of Europe in the 21st century. That is huge moral challenge for NATO, and NATO must get answer to this.
Okay, thanks a lot, Oleg. What do you think about Ukraine is expediting its integration into European Union?
Well, here we have similar problems because same countries which are blocking or delaying our integration or denying our integration in NATO, they are members of European Union. Same Germany, same France, same Hungary, and others. So at one hand, we have European Parliament and President of European Parliament saying that Ukraine is definitely getting status of candidate country. I remind you again, Serbia is qualified for candidate country with all understanding of European values. Hungary is member of European Union, and you see how Hungary qualifies here. So Ukraine is clearly qualified for candidacy for membership. And it is very important. I'll tell you why. Because when I was Deputy Prime Minister, or even when I was Director of National Bank, I was coordinating all technical assistance to financial and banking sector. And I saw a striking difference in that assistance, which was provided to us Ukrainians and to that time candidate for EU. Ukraine was getting mostly technical assistance with advisors with huge salaries. And those advisors that didn't speak language, we had to provide them with offices, translation, interpreters, and only 10%, maximum 15% we can get like computers or something. The candidate countries were getting very different assistance. It was not about advising, they were getting training to become future members of EU. The EU was helping them to create institutions. EU was training future government officials, building up balances between institutions. So the EU was preparing that country to be full member. So when I was asking why in hell you are not doing this in Ukraine, they say, oh, you are not candidate. When you will be a candidate, we will change our policies. So that is why it is so important that we are formally candidate to EU. It may take some time for us to move further, but we have to admit again, let's not forget that we are not angels. I mean, my government, previous governments, talking so much about European values and European perspectives were not acting as true European politicians. They were trying to keep judges dependent. They were against independence of different institutions. They were against EU politicians being in supervisory boards of anti-corruption. You know all that. We were far from being really a European country where all European principles are there. Our politicians used to support general declarations about European principles, but when it comes personally to them, to declaring their profits, to be honest, not to use their position for corruption. We had a number of cases where Ukrainian officials, police, secret service, tax, could not explain where money is coming from, and they couldn't be brought to justice. So this all must be remembered. We must change it after the war. We should have very effective, with minimum corruption possibilities country, basically paperless, and then we have much better chances to move. But when we try, when there would be temptation for Ukrainian government after the war to concentrate power in one hand, not to have balance of institutions, not to have international courts, not to have guarantees of ownership, we'll be facing problems again. But I hope this will not happen.
Thanks a bunch, Oleg. I'm afraid of a future in which Trump can win the election in 2024. It looks like the war won't be over by then. And under Trump, the USA support for Ukraine could end quickly. Then China and Russia will be able to achieve their goals. What is successful plan for Ukraine in the event of a Trump victory?
I don't like it at all. Well, I am in the States, but I'm not government official, so I can just tell everybody fuck off, whatever channel I'm talking at. But I try not to influence American voters directly. You know, while I am invited on major American TV shows like CNN, Fox, or MSDM, I try to be balanced. I would like very much both Republicans and Democrats concentrate on defending Ukraine. You must know that absolute majority of Ukrainians, of Ukrainian origins, they are Republicans. They are Republicans. I know when Trump was campaigning versus Hillary, I was surprised when I saw a family of one very prominent Ukrainian of American origin, and her parents said that we are going to vote for Trump. So Republicans have been traditionally anti-Soviet. You know, Reagan was a Republican. The Soviet Union was beaten by Republicans. Democrats quite often are accused of being too soft with Russia, with Moscow, with leftist ideas, but I would like that to disappear. I try to speak to many ordinary Americans, and they all say that they will never vote for Trump, but I don't know. I told you that I was seeing that voter, strong supporter of Trump, who, when she was asked if there are two candidates for presidency, Putin or Biden, she will vote for Putin, clearly. But that is an exception. That is clearly minority, hardcore, crazy people. Trump, in short, did huge damage to US reputation, because he still, I was reading an article a few days ago, he was having huge reception at his royal palace, where there were his supporters, and they've been seeing the movie saying that Trump actually won elections. So 2 years after he lost elections, he still is trying to convince himself and his supporters that he actually won. But Zuckerberg, Democrats, fake news, everybody was against him. They have stolen his victory. So he undermined the biggest foundation for American democracy. But again, he is planning to run. He is looking for vice presidency. So I don't know. I believe a lot depends on how effective Biden policy will be vis-a-vis Ukraine. Because if Biden will fail to reach convincing victory in Ukraine, if America at large would fail to stand 100% with Ukraine as a partner in the war with Russia as an empire of evil, it means for the rest of the world, it's a clear message. You lost, you failed your allies in Afghanistan, you were not able to stop Putin in Russia, because US was saying that they are not going to allow Putin. If Putin will dare, he would pay dearly, and practically that he would be destroyed. And he is a butcher, and he is a bloody killer, you name it. That is, he's a war criminal. Every present politician in Biden's administration is calling Putin a war criminal. So if you cannot punish a war criminal, you are good for nothing. Therefore, chances for Biden, for people like Trump or other guys to get victory would be much higher. In short, Biden has a lot at stake, and probably even his political interests are there that Ukraine is successful, and that if he would help Ukraine to win that war, he might have very different map in Europe, because EU would be different. If Russia is defeated, if US would be guarantor of our security, not with words, but with all its military aid. In short, if attack against Ukraine would be considered attack against Russia, against US, this is possible. this requires a political decision or vote of Senate, where Senate can approve legislation allowing Biden to use military forces of US in case of attack against Ukraine. That would be different Europe. There would be Ukraine, Poland, being the biggest player in EU. We will be supported by Baltic countries. So there would be majority of new democracies in Europe, and those put in Festaya would be in minority. And Russia would be kept there for a long time, and Putin would be brought to justice. So that is all possible only if we will win, if US would be standing firmly with us, if there would be guarantees of military involvement of US in case of attack against Ukraine again. Otherwise, Putin would take upper hand. Chinese and other authoritative leaders would look at it, and the world would change beyond recognition.
Thanks a lot, Oleg. The next question is very interesting from Mariana. Volodymyr Zelensky is convinced that the victory for Ukraine means returning Russian troops to the positions they had before the 24th of February, and suggests postpone the deoccupation of Crimea and Donbass, Luhansk for 15 years. Is it a sensible decision, or should this issue be solved as soon as possible without a delay?
Well, my answer is yes. This is what you call realistic decision. That let's begin from where we were before Russian invasion. The problem here is that Putin is not going to agree to this. With Crimea, 15 years, I like this because there would be no Putin in 15 years. There would be very different Russia in 15 years. There would be very different world, but we will not recognize it. Here, I'm citing, when I see my Japanese colleagues, you know, that Japan till nowadays have no peace treaty with Russia. Japan refuses to reach peace treaty until Soviet Union would liberate the territories occupied by Soviet Union after World War II. They say, until you get out, we are not signing any treaty. So for Ukraine, it's important not to recognize Crimea as a Russian territory, not to recognize independence of occupied Donetsk and Luhansk areas, not to give Russia any chance to formally claim that Russian occupied territories are now part of Russia and demanding from Ukraine to recognize it. So that is not possible. But as a compromise, and that's why I agree here that for Zelensky, that would be a victory, but for Putin, that would be a defeat. Therefore, how to balance this, I don't know. Well, I know weapons, and weapons, as Kuleba said, from the West, and then we can get it.
Thanks a lot. Can war in Ukraine be avoided?
Could be. No,
Yeah.
it could not be. Yeah, it could be avoided if there is no Ukraine. If Ukraine is a part of Russia, yes. But if you say Ukraine and you write it from the capital letter and you means it's a sovereign state, there was no chance that Putin would allow this to happen. He's sick with this, and not only Putin. The majority of Russians believe that there is no such nation as Ukraine. There is no such history. And even the Patriarch Kirill said that there were never Ukrainian history. There was never such a phenomenon as Ukrainians, Ukrainian culture, Ukrainian history. It was all Russia. But Ukrainians have stolen it, and Ukrainian Nazis and Ukrainian radicals have invented this country. And that was supported by West, and West encouraged Ukraine to steal from Russia parts of Russian territory. So no, if you say Ukraine, it will never be accepted in Russia that there is such phenomena, such country, such language, such history, such territory as Ukraine, which is independent and sovereign. So we couldn't avoid it.
Okay, thanks a lot. Does Hungary have hidden territory demands on our country, or is their position on Ukraine really revenge?
Yeah, it has. It's not only Hungary. From time to time, we see Hungarians claiming, we see Romanians claiming parts of, it's like it's the precedents. After World War II, there were decisions that we recognize states within the boundaries which were drawn after World War II. Different countries have different histories, but it was understood that if you try to change the boundaries, if you try to return to some period in the history when that or this territory was owned by other country, you will never and ever get out of it. It's like in labyrinth. Therefore, that Helsinki Act, the major idea was to recognize that boundaries are sacred. You don't change boundaries specifically with means of war. Therefore, we have Hungary, we have Romania, part of their politicians, Grande Mare, which claim that Bessarabia is theirs. We have some politicians in Czechia saying that there are Rusini, and they claim that part of Zakarpattia is their territory. So yes, we have those claims, but they are relics from the Cold War times, and the modern Europe refuses to support such ambitions and such claims. And one of the demands for the country which is joining EU and NATO, that they would never make territorial claims against their neighbors.
Thanks a lot. May it be possible that Jens Stoltenberg is a Russian agent?
No, that's stupidity. That's something which part of Russians' informational bots and agents provocateurs are trying to call everybody. Just he is a classical politician. His problem is that he is not the boss of NATO. He is not начальник, yeah? He doesn't give orders. The member countries make decisions, and he just announces this. For people with Russian mentality, it's very difficult to imagine that you can be called Secretary General and you are not deciding everything yourself.
Thanks a lot. Does Ukraine have to return all help like money and military equipment from Europe and USA after end of the war?
No, we are getting it even now. I strongly support the initiatives to use part of frozen money, Russian frozen money. First of all, they should be legally confiscated, because when you freeze money, it doesn't mean that the owner loses it. They would try to use their richly paid lawyers to get money back, as a number of Yanukovych lawyers helped him, Yanukovych and Azarov and other heroes in brackets of that era to get back money which were frozen after Orange Revolution, mostly because of weaknesses of Ukrainian Office of Procurator General. But here I believe that we must get part of frozen assets, and we are talking about many hundreds of billions of money in UK even now, which are already identified, and that there is a tendency, the West is finding, the intelligence is finding more and more assets. And again, even with this money, part of national reserves are like 300 billion of national reserves of Central Bank of Russia are frozen. There are hundreds of billions in Switzerland, all over the world. But on top of that, Russia must pay for the war. Russia must pay maybe for decades, if not for hundreds of years, for what they did, until they would compensate all the losses. And we are not talking about the cost of destroyed premises, infrastructure. We are talking about compensation to those Ukrainians who lost their family members, who lost their kids, who lost most precious, what we have, lives. And there are international procedures. You know how much Russia would pay for shutting down Malaysian airplane. We are talking about millions per person here. So that all should be part of Russian future and the price for this aggression.
Thanks a lot, Oleg. Time's up. What do you think? Do we have time for the last question, I guess?
Yeah, let's have the last one, and because I have another.
And the last question,
approaching.
I see. The last question is extremely positive. Ukraine after war will be better.
Yeah, Ukraine, we cannot afford Ukraine after war to repeat all the mistakes we had after Orange Revolution, after Revolution of Dignity. I went through these two revolutions. We must learn because war has united us again. But I remember my feelings after Revolution of Dignity. I believe that time we will definitely not repeat mistakes of Orange Revolution. That time we will be very, very organized, corruption-free. We have pro-European government. We are so united. We will move on. But things have not moved in that direction. So now there is much more active civil society, and it's not only NGOs anymore. You see how much volunteers are doing. Politicians, my feeling is that Zelensky is now like connected to Ukrainian people like Bluetooth. He feels very closely what we feel. Therefore, when he's talking about red lines, he clearly knows what he's talking about. So he clearly knows that he will not be allowed to do certain things which are not accepted by Ukrainian people. But we should concentrate on not letting any future politicians to try to play the tricks they used before. Every politician should be under control, under public control. There should be independent institutions. Courts cannot depend on who is the president. Judges could not look at who is there in politics. We must have parties. So there is not a big challenge here. If we would like to be successful, we should do what our successful neighbors do. Let's look at Baltics, let's look at Poles, let's look at other Central European countries, and we see what kind of government system they have, what checks and balances they have, and let's do it.
Thanks a lot, Oleg. So guys, unfortunately, time's up. Thank you so much for a lot of questions. Unfortunately, we didn't have time to discuss all of them, but I'm sure that Oleg answered a lot of questions. And personally, me, Oleg, you made much smarter than before that. Guys, let's say a huge thank you to Oleg.
Thank you so much.
Oleg,
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
From all audience,
Thank
from
you.
all Green Forest, we say a huge thank you. It was really interesting, a lot of information and a lot of useful information. And let's believe in victory, I would say. And thanks a lot.
Let's believe, but let's contribute to it.
Yeah, let's do. Okay, guys.
Thank you.
Yes.
Bye, guys. Bye.
Sorry, can you share a record?